Welcome to our program on Kaizen leader training and how to improve the practice to performance ratio. I'm Ellen Milnes, Director of Marketing for MoreSteam.com, the sponsor of today's webcast. MoreSteam is a global provider of online process improvement training and support tools, such as online simulations, data analysis, and project management. We've been in business for 15 years and recently passed the milestone of having trained 500,000 individuals. We serve over half of the Fortune 500 companies, and you see a sampling of our corporate clients on your screen right now. Our Lean Six Sigma training is approved by ASQ and PMI. Also, our courses are offered by leading universities in exec ed, graduate, and undergrad programs within their business and engineering curriculums. We enjoy providing the platform for our clients and partners to showcase the work that they're doing. Today's program is scheduled for 1 hour. During the program, you'll be able to pose questions by typing in the question block of the attendee control panel, which you see on the slide in front of you. Please enter your questions as they arise and don't hold them until the very end. We'll take time at the end for the questions that have been submitted. Another question that we always get is whether this webcast will be recorded and whether Whitney's slides will be available to you. And the answer is yes to both. A copy of today's materials will be posted to our webcast library on the MoreSteam.com website. I'll email you a link next week when the materials have been uploaded and are available for your review and sharing. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Whitney Mantegna. Whitney is the owner and principal consultant for Collaborative Lean Solutions. Prior to founding her company in 2013, Whitney served as the Vice President of Operational Excellence at Cardinal Health, where she was the deployment lead for the corporate shared services functions, as well as head of the Corporate Center for Operational Excellence. Whitney is a certified black belt and master black belt with 14 years experience coaching, mentoring, teaching, and deploying Lean Six Sigma. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in business administration from Ohio State and received an MBA from Baker College. Before Whitney begins her presentation, I'd like to set the stage a bit. Now, I'm generally the last one to draw football analogies, but 'tis the season and it's the best analogy I have for this topic. All of us on the call are interested in producing outstanding process improvement results, or we wouldn't be investing the time in this webcast. So let's contrast a typical college football team with process improvement teams, and in particular, practice techniques. So a typical college football team plays a minimum of 12 games, each of which has 60 minutes of running clock time for a total of 12 hours, which frankly is a small fraction of the time it takes us to watch the games. Now, when it comes to practicing during the season, the team practices approximately 380 hours. This would even probably be higher, if not limited, by the NCAA. That makes the ratio of practice to play 32-1, where the team plays fewer games and all of the practice is completed before or between games. When it comes to Lean Six Sigma projects and Kaizen events, it's very much a team sport. What's your ratio of practice to performance? And when does the practice occur? Before a project or Kaizen event, or during the project or event? We favor the football model. While every project or Kaizen event is an opportunity to gain experience, the number of projects you complete in a year is relatively small. Each project is that much more critical to your and your company's success. So shouldn't you be as prepared as possible before you start to play? With that football model in mind, MoreSteam worked with Whitney to build more practice-based exercises into Kaizen leader training. We developed this model to give Kaizen leaders the advantage of risk-free practice prior to leading their first event in order to build their competence and confidence and to provide the organization with a faster return on investment. Thank you, Whitney, for sharing your experience and insights with the group today.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you everyone for attending the webcast today on a Friday afternoon before a holiday week. We're glad to have you here, and I look forward to spending the next hour talking to you a little bit about Kaizen in general, and specifically around how to build and give you some information on the blended Kaizen model and training model that have worked with More Steam to put together. So I thought I would start by level setting everyone on the call about what I mean when I'm talking about Kaizen. And to me, a Kaizen has three main hallmarks. First are the people. And this Kaizen is all about leveraging the power of the people who do the work to identify the problems, to make sure that they help understand current state and what's really going on in the work, and then finally, they're the ones who solve the work. It's not directors, it's not managers coming in to solve the problems for them. It's really unleashing the power of the employees and those who do the work to solve the problems. It's also about time. A Kaizen event has a set time frame, and we'll talk about some different options for that here in a little bit, but we're really talking about 3, 4, 5 days where the team is together, they're working on a specific set of activities, and then implementing the majority of those solutions within that time frame. And because you have that time frame, and because you have the people who have the work and are able to know the answers to what's wrong with the daily work they do, really, Kaizen is all about fast results. It's not about a 6-month or a 9-month huge project. It's really around how do we take small scoped problems, get the right people to solve them, and achieve fast results. So the first thing, we've got a series of questions that we're going to ask you during the webcast today, and that will help me know some of the things that we want to make sure that we cover or spend more time or less time with things. So our first poll is coming up. So let me launch it here, and the question is around gauging the experience that you all have with Kaizen events. So we'll give it just another few seconds here so everyone can vote. All right, so I'm going to now close the voting, and I will share our results. So it looks like a lot of you have some experience with Kaizen, so that's really great. So 78% of our participants have had some experience with Kaizen, and 22% of you have not. So I'll take those results away, and we'll move on to our next slide. So one of the things that I often get asked as we are going out and talking about Kaizen events are, what are the differences? What are the difference between green belt, black belt projects? And so I always like to use this slide because there is truly a continuous improvement continuum of projects. On the far left, you have green belt or black belt projects, and they are generally very focused on variation, quality, and the key to a green belt or black belt project is it's problem solving, leveraging data analysis, things that you really have to go in, dig deep, do some statistical work in order to be able to understand what's going on and what it is that you need in order to solve it. On the far right of the continuum are things called quick hits. You also might call those more of a daily Kaizen. And these are the small improvements that we hope our employees take every day to improve their work. So they're not really even a project. They're the things that we see a problem, we fix a problem. And are Kaizen events. Kaizens are smaller and more contained in scope and generally are not really dependent on data or analysis. You know, when I think about Kaizens, think about problems that you can see very easily and improvements that are easily identified. You'll notice on the far left-hand side, you know, we have this laid out as in the DMAIC methodology. And, you know, there's some debate. I mean, different organizations, some use DMAIC, some use PDCA. I will say in my experience, a lot of organizations right or wrong, start out with more of a Six Sigma mindset and then start to layer in more lean and Kaizen thinking into their organizations. And so, I think if DMAIC is in an environment already, that you just go with it and work with that versus trying to create totally new terminology around PDCA or some of the other methodology terminology that comes with Kaizen. Because in the end, if you really think about it, any project that you do, you need to define the problem, which is our D, understand current state, which is measure, do some analysis to figure out what's going on in root cause, which would be A, put solutions in place and test those solutions, and then ultimately make sure that those solutions stay after we're done with the event. So let's now pivot directly to Kaizen, and I bet you guys didn't think you were going to get a sports lesson while you were coming to the webcast today, so we've talked a little bit about football, and so now we're going to talk a little bit about rugby, because as we were having conversations about Kaizen, it just is a very, very different animal. So green belt and black belt projects just don't have a different focus and complexity. The way that you run them is a totally different animal, and when you think about rugby, if anybody out there knows anything about rugby, it's a very fast sport. The clock starts and the clock doesn't stop until the game is done. So you don't have the opportunity to have a timeout or take halftime in order to kind of adjust to what people are doing on the field and have time to sit back and reflect and make some adjustments. All of that has to happen on the fly. And that's what a Kaizen event is like. You go in, you start the event off, and it's boom, 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 boom from there. So you very rapidly have to be able to move the team through the stages of team forming, storming, norming, and you're not able to be agile and to adjust during the course of a Kaizen event. It's a lot more detrimental than it might be in a green belt or a black belt project where you have, say, 6 months, 4 months, 6 months, 9 months in order to be able to, so if you get off to a little rocky start, you've got a lot of time to be able to recover that. So when you think about this, so think of Kaizen as a rugby match and something that starts fast and goes all the way to the end without any time to sort of stop and redirect. It really creates some unique challenges, not only in running an event, but it's very challenging to build a Kaizen training program, and because you have to really make sure that the facilitators not only understand the tools, but you have to provide them with some experience in facilitating them in a variety of scenarios and a variety of different ways so that they're comfortable not just with the tools and sort of the technical aspects, but how to shift and adjust during that Kaizen event. So when you think about Kaizen, and a lot of you have had some experience with Kaizen event, I think hopefully you would all agree with me to say a successful event is more than just tools. So you might have a tool expert, but if they can't really facilitate the event, then it's not going to be as effective as it can. So, I always think the secret sauce of a successful Kaizen is a combination of things. It's facilitation, it's flexibility, and it's understanding the right tools to use in order to solve the problem at hand, because every Kaizen, you're not going to use the same set of tools in every different event. So if you keep this in mind, what we try to do is we started to think about the guiding principles of Kaizen training design, keep these things in mind. So again, tools, using some sort of simulation to give people practice at a Kaizen event, and then making sure that we provide multiple opportunities to practice facilitating all of those common Kaizen activities. So when you're thinking about Kaizen and you're thinking about building a Kaizen training program, you have to take a step back and say, what is the model that I'm building to? So just to come out and say, hey, look, we have training, but not really think about how are you going to execute on Kaizens? What are the expectations that you're going to have for people when they're doing their Kaizen training? And so there really are two things that you ultimately need to think about. One is the events themselves and what's going to happen and what's the structure that you put in place around the events. And then the second thing that you have are, what are the expectations of participants post-training? And we'll walk through both of those as we go through this section. But let's talk first about defining the content and the flow of a Kaizen event itself. So when you think about Kaizen activities, there truly are three sort of distinct phases to a Kaizen event. There's this concept of pre-event prep. So think about these as all of your define activities. Identifying a sponsor, putting together your charter so that you understand the problem that you're going to be solving, the goals, what the resources that you're going to have, spending time as a facilitator out at the Gemba, watching the process and making sure that you have an understanding of how the process flows. All of the logistic planning has to happen during pre-event prep, so what are the rooms, catering, all of just those tactical things that you need to think of. And then that everything is in place for when the event starts so that you can kick it off and keep going. Then you have your event week, and I have 5 days listed here, and I'll talk to you in a few minutes about why I feel that a 5-day model, at least in a transactional environment, is the best. But we'll get to that and dig deep into what happens during a Kaizen event in a couple of slides. And then finally, there are some sort of follow-up action. So while the intent of a Kaizen event is to get 85 to 90% of all of the improvements completed during that week that you're all together, there certainly will be some follow-up actions that have to take place. You won't be able to get 100% of your actions completed in that week, and so putting together a plan as to what still needs to be done and who's going to be responsible for that, and then taking 15 to 30 days in order to get those activities done. So, I always would say generally, soup to nuts, a Kaizen event should take anywhere between 30 to 45 days max. If you go beyond that time frame, either there are some issues around follow-up after the event, or perhaps the event was scoped too large to begin with. So we've come to our second poll question, and the second poll question, I want to get a feel for those of you on the phone, how often, if your organization, if you're leveraging Kaizens, how long those Kaizen events typically are. So I will launch the poll. All right, so we're going to close for results, and then let me share them with you. Hopefully you're all seeing those on your screen. So we have a pretty big split. We have 31% of the participants that typically have Kaizens 3 days or less, 24%, so a quarter, 4 to 5 days, and then about 30% that don't currently run Kaizen events. And I would say this is probably standard to what I see. And so our next slide, I'm going to close our poll results now and move on to the next slide and talk about a Kaizen event flow that covers 4.5 days, and then talk a little bit about, too, when you have events that run less than this 4 or 5 day time frame, what often happens. So I will say, in manufacturing environments and some very operational environments, very mature organizations, and the organizations that are very mature with Kaizen events, 3-day events sometimes do work. I think it's really hard to make it work in less than 3 days. And again, keeping in mind that, definition of Kaizen and the purpose we're talking about right now is, you get through all of the activities. So you define the problem, you understand why it's happening, you find solutions, and then you implement those solutions. And so I think, though, in a transactional environment, it's really, really hard to get through that. So I've given you on the screen, you should see right now a Kaizen event flow, and this flows over 4.5 days. And so day 1 is focusing on the define, measure tasks. we talked a couple slides ago, a lot of the defined activities will be done by the time you get into the room, but you want to review some of those things with the participants. So day one is around training the team, spending some good dedicated time helping to build the skill of the people who are attending your event. Because the reality is this is a great opportunity not only for the organization to solve problems, but to build capability and hopefully to even build out your next wave of Kaizen leaders. So taking the time, taking a couple of hours to help ground people on the concepts, what's going to happen in a Kaizen event, very important time spent. Now I will say as organizations mature, and a lot of people you may get into Kaizens that everyone's participated in Kaizens before. In those types of scenarios, then obviously you have to be flexible and think about what really is appropriate for team training. But after the training occurs, then you have your charter and your SIPOC review, so the team is grounded, sponsor kickoff, sponsor coming in and letting the team know what their expectations are and why this is really important to them. And then the rest of day one is really around understanding current state. So whether you choose to use a value stream mapping or process mapping, making sure that you have a paper picture of the process and then backing that up by actually going out to where the work is happening and seeing the process flow to make sure that that process map or value stream map is in fact appropriate. And then finally, non-value add and pain point identification. So really getting that good feel for current state. Day two, then you're going to go into why is this happening and the analyze phase. So we'll have root cause analysis, brainstorming and selecting your solutions, and ultimately future state mapping. What's the future going to look like? If we fix these things and if we put these solutions in place, what's going to be different in the process? Day three is about lining up, okay, what are we going to do over the next couple of days to get all of this implemented? And then there's some form of pitch out to the sponsors and the stakeholders to let them know what you found, what you want to do about it, and get their approval to move forward. And then starting about halfway through day three, all through day four, is about implementing the solutions. And then finally day five, or which may be a half day, is regrouping, figuring out what you weren't able to get implemented, coming up with that actual action plan, doing some financial calculations. If you're in a company that wants to verify the financial impact of your Kaizen in the week, it may be after the action plan is closed, some sort of final toll gate or closeout to the sponsor and stakeholders to let them know what happened and what the results of your Kaizen were. So these are the standard things that should happen regardless of how many days you run your event. And what I find, and again I'll say specifically in transactional environments, are when you choose to cut Kaizens down to less than 4 days, 4 or 5 days, the things that ultimately fall apart are the training. So we just skip the training, and so it's just about, okay, let's get down, let's solve the problem, and let's get out. And then it's all about we don't implement the solutions. And that's really pretty tough because when you're in an event, and for those of you who've run events in the past, there's a lot of energy. In a good Kaizen event, there's a lot of energy and excitement about what's happening in the event and that we're getting things done. And once you leave that room and you go back out to your real job, reality intrudes, priorities change. And so when you don't get the majority of your actions implemented within that week, then things start to ebb off, and that's really where you see your cycle times start to go out. You get 60, 90, 120-day Kaizen events, or in some cases, sadly, things never get implemented, and so all of the solutions don't end up implemented. So that's why when I've run Kaizens in the past and when I work with folks, I really try to push the discipline of going through the full event and making sure you have time to do all of the activities. So that's a little bit about the events. And then you have to think about, we said you have to really think about what's the structure of the program that you're putting them in and what is it that you want them to be able to do after training. And so here are some thoughts on just some certification requirements. And this specific model has 3 components. The first is training, and that's all about completing an online and classroom training curriculum. And we're going to talk about More Steam's blended program here in a little bit as we get to the specifics of the training program. And then the second piece are observation. And this is all about having people either participate or observe a minimum of one Kaizen event before they go out and actually start executing on an event. And that's really, really important. And I would say if you have a mature program, I think it's great to be able to have your folks sit through a Kaizen before they come into class. It just helps them with context and be a little more comfortable with the experience that they're going to have. If you don't, and if you don't have that luxury because you're just starting a program, then there are some things that you can do. You can have the class co-lead a event that's associated with training so that everyone comes in and does it together with coaching to make them more comfortable with what's going to happen in an actual Kaizen event, or before you set them out on their own to do their own Kaizen event. And then of course you want them to do something with the training. I think we all could agree training for training's sake is not a good use of anybody's time or resources. And so what are the expectations for them to independently lead events after the training? And in this case, 2, could be 3. That really is up to your organization as to what type of event requirements that you would have for them to achieve certification. So before we close out the Kaizen model, there are just a few considerations to think of. We talked about the first one, which is timing of participation, and really the best thing would be prior to training, or this concept of a sponsored event week when you'd have coaching on site and let multiple participants help co-lead a Kaizen event before independently leading one. And then I think that leads us to the second point here, which is coaching support. We've said several times during the webcast that Kaizens are really, really tough events and require flexibility and really good facilitation skills. And it also needs, as people are learning, some coaching support. And so the best model is if you have experienced resources within your own organization to support those Kaizen leaders and to be in the room and to help coach them through all of the pre-work activities and during the week to make sure that the Kaizens go well and they feel supported and successful as a Kaizen leader. If you don't have that, if you're in a situation where you're just starting your Kaizen program, then I really do think it's important to figure out how you maybe bring in externally some short-term support to help build the capability, whether it be through training and then coaching of the events, with the goal, though, that you very quickly, build this capability within your own organization, because people within your own organization are the ones who know the ins and outs, the politics of the organization. So really thinking about experience and coaching support are very, very important things to keep in mind when you're building a model. So once you've aligned on the model and those post-event expectations and what you're going to do with coaching, then it's really time to build the training model itself. And that's what we're going to spend the rest of the time that we have together talking about. So as we began to think, and as Ellen said at the beginning of the webcast, I helped More Steam partnered with More Steam to really think about and build this blended Kaizen model and training model. And so as we really began to think about bending the model, it was really important to first lay out what we needed to be accomplished by the training and how to best do that. And so what we came up with were really one was all around the Kaizen execution. So what's the flow of a Kaizen event? So going back to the graphic we saw a few slides ago around how the 5 days roll out, picking the right tools for the problem at hand, because you won't use every tool in every Kaizen event, and then how to sequence those activities. So obviously, you want to understand current state before you start coming up with solutions. So making sure that we train them and give them practice in that area. And then finally was the whole issue of facilitation. And that really comes down to building confidence in facilitation skills, providing multiple opportunities to facilitate while you're in class, as well as observe others to facilitate the different tools in a Kaizen event, and giving people real-time feedback in class around how they did so that as they go out and lead their own events, they're very prepared to do that. around way in order if we wanted to build a blended model, what was the best way to do that? And ultimately the training design that we landed on is on your screen now. So it became a blend of online curriculum, which is about 22 hours of online curriculum. And in that online curriculum covers the Kaizen model, covers all of the things, sort of the pre-work activities you would do around project definition, picking the right metric, and information on all of the lean tools. And then that allowed the classroom session, which is a 2-day session, to really focus on doing some brief tool review and practice exercises. So when we talked about letting people see not just what the tools are, but how they work, so practicing those exercises while giving them a refresher on the tools, leveraging simulation as a proxy for an actual Kaizen event, and then providing multiple opportunities for them to be able to practice their facilitation over and over and over again with those tools. So one of the things that we quickly learned, and if you've done any research or done have any experience with blended learning, one of the things that is really, really important is to have your classroom sessions be interactive. And if you look at, there's some research that's been done that Morse team has done looking at their current client base, and the overwhelming majority of successful blended learning programs attributed to that success and have a lot of simulation and practice as a part of their blended programs. Along with that, the question was asked, what would you do more of? So if you had it to do over again, what would you do more of? And again, a very, very high percentage came up with, I would put more activities, more simulation, more practice in the program. And so just as Ellen talked about at the beginning about football or baseball or any sports, part of the program and how you get good and how you get better is this practice and this interactivity. So I'm going to talk about the different ways in which we made the training program interactive in a minute, but before I do so, I want to get to our last question, and which is specifically about Morse team's lean process simulation inbox, because again, want to get a gauge for how many of you know what it is, so how much detail I'll go into. So the poll should be open. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close the voting, and we'll share the results. And it looks like the majority of you don't have any background with it and have not heard about it. So we will spend a little bit of time talking about the simulation and what it's about and what it does for the purpose of making sure that you understand why we included it in the training and what it's meant to do. So let me take the results away. I do want to go back, so I'm going to step back a slide in my presentation and say, as we look to keep it interactive, we used a variety of different ways to do that. And those ways kind of were a combination of tennis balls, some shapes, pigs, and an inbox. And so now what I'm going to do now is go through each one of these different exercises that we did, talk to you about what they are, so you have a little flavor for what they are, and why they were really important to the learning that you get from them and why they were important to add into the class. So the first one is a tennis ball exercise, and the tennis ball exercise is all about setting the stage at the very beginning of training. So this is something that we do at the very beginning of the classroom session, gets the group engaged immediately, and demonstrates the context of process improvement and really how small changes can make truly big differences in a process. So I'm sure many of you have seen the tennis ball exercise before, and there are a lot of different ways that you can facilitate it. But the overall, at a high level, however you choose to do it is, you have a group of people. It can be a small group. It can be a large group. You give them a tennis ball and you give them some rules, typically which are only one person can touch the tennis ball at a time. Everybody has to touch it in order, and it has to start and stop with the same person. So if you set those rules, and generally depending on the size of the group, but with a large group, I would say maybe 15 folks or so, that'll normally take, you start your first round, that's probably 45 seconds. And then you give the class subsequent rounds to try to make improvements to that. And again, with a group of 15 people without changing the group size, normally they can get that down to 6 or 7 seconds over the course of 3 to maximum 4 rounds. A lot of us have seen. It's a really, really powerful way in which you can engage and get them started and excited and breaking the ice, but really thinking about process improvement in general. So the next, the curriculum, is something that we call the SHAPES exercise. And the SHAPES exercise is really there to build understanding of the impact of lean tools. How the classroom piece is structured, so after we do our tennis ball exercise and some basics on Kaizen, then we move in to spend the morning on the tool review that I discussed earlier. And so it's about covering some of the tools, talking about process flow, talking about batching, talking about process balancing, pull, one-piece flow, and then leveraging the shape simulation in order to demonstrate the impact of all of the concepts. So it's pretty simple. You'll see on your screen, they start with the blank template, which are shapes, and their job as a group, in groups of 5, are to fill out this template and trace over everything in red. So a pretty simple process that they have, but run over multiple rounds really can be very powerful. So to give you a little bit about the exercise, first round, you have them, you set them not in order of the work they do, so kind of not have them in the flow of the work, and there are 4 workers and 1 timekeeper to do the data collection, and you have them run the first round, and it's typically each round is 4 minutes. So they run this round, and you do some data collection around how long it takes them to get their work. And the other piece that I missed in this, not only are they out of process sequence, but we also batch the work in this round. So they're only sending things on in groups of 5. And that serves as your baseline round. So that is the baseline performance, and it's really meant to simulate exactly how most processes are done, how many times in transactional environments people are all over the place. They are not located together. They are holding their work and doing a bunch of work and passing it on to the next step of the process. So then we talk about the concepts about process flow and how just simple things of cellular structures or trying to align the physical structure of where people work with how the process runs. And so our second round just shows improvement if you just align the process flow to the way the process actually works. Everything else is the same. They still batch, and we run the round for 4 minutes and collect the data, the same data again. And you'll typically see a little bit of improvement there, but not a ton. So then we start to talk about batching and how when you batch work, that impedes flow of the process. And so our third round, they don't move, they stay in their little cellular structure. All we do is eliminate the batch in the process. And as you can imagine, you really see a huge impact then at when the batch is removed. Once we have the batching, but it's still, there are some things, you still have some people waiting and people working a lot. So as we start to talk about the concepts of process balancing, we let them brainstorm some ideas on how they might balance the work in this process and run the 4th round. And again, you typically see improvement. And then the final round, we talk about pull and one-piece flow, and that is your final round of the simulation. So again, great mix of we talk about a few slides and then immediately let's practice and see what these do, what real impact these have in a process. Then we move on to one of the other concepts that we cover in class is this concept of standard work and the importance of really strong standard work. And to demonstrate that, we do what is probably one of my absolute favorite exercises, lean exercises ever, which is called Standard Pig. And you'll see on the screen a picture of 3 different rounds of standard pig, and unfortunately you cannot see what they look like. But the theory of standard pig is you give people very general instructions in the first round, a gridded piece of paper and instructions that are like 2 lines worth of instructions, and ask them to draw pigs. And so in round 1, it's always good for a great laugh because you get all kinds of pigs. You get pigs that look like pigs, you get cat pigs, you get dinosaur pigs, you get horse pigs. Really, really funny how people draw these pigs, but really shows when you don't have standard work, when you just give very vague instructions, which we often do, this is what you get. You get a lot of variation. In round 2 of standard pig, if you've not seen it, you give people just a list of work instructions. And what you find is just giving them a list of instructions to follow, the pigs don't really look much better. You might see a little improvement. Sometimes the pigs actually get worse. So in round 3, what we do and what we show is if you give people those same instructions and a picture of what the pig looks like, so that key combination of not only the process steps but visual aids, then you get, coming out of round 3, all your pictures of these beautifully looking consistent pigs. So really great exercise to talk about standard work, and just a fun way to learn and see the power of standard work done well. And then our final exercise, and really what we spend the majority of the 2 days together, is called Inbox, and that is really a simulation that allows us to facilitate and have the students facilitate a Kaizen event. So Inbox is a simulation that is built around lean principles, and it is built to be a common transactional process that is all done via email. It's all a virtual process. So there's no, if any of you have seen lean simulations in the past, oftentimes they're physical, so you see a lot of physical motion. In this, everyone's working on their computers, information is coming into their inbox, they have work instructions as to what they're to do, and that helps them to run this process. And the process itself is looking at for a coffee shop or a coffee chain, the process by how which they select store locations and then negotiate with landlords and get leases and rent terms together, so lease amounts and rent terms together. And it's a pretty complex process, really builds itself well because everyone's doing their work. No one kind of knows what anyone else is doing. It gives the opportunity for them to build charters, to process map their work out, to really understand what's going into the process, facilitate using tools and lean concepts on what's the root cause and how are they going to fix it, and then ultimately running a couple of rounds to help them with those improvements. So a really great way, and we spend about a day and a half actually having them do that, run that as a Kaizen event, and everyone participates, everyone has an opportunity to be able to make sure that they get opportunities to facilitate. So once the program was together, obviously we're all continuous improvement folks, and so we wanted to pilot the program because a lot of work had been done, but how did it work in a real company? And so Nationwide Insurance was generous enough to be our pilot location for the program. We ran the pilot in July of this past year, and part of why Nationwide, some context of why Nationwide was interested in a blended program, was they currently have a green belt and black belt program. They have a small Kaizen program that was built on a 5-day classroom model, and what they really want to be able to do is to build Kaizen training into their black belt and green belt program so that black belt and green belts exit the training being able to run Kaizen events. The model that Nationwide has in place today only has 3 classroom days in the entire experience. They have a heavily online coaching model that's in place, and they bring folks in for 3 days to do a 1-day lean simulation and 2 days of the Sigma Brew DMAIC simulation. What this allows Nationwide to do, because they were already leveraging Inbox for that first day of the simulation, is it's going to allow them to incorporate in the future Kaizen training into the green belt and black belt situation or curriculum, with only adding one additional day for simulation, because the reality was they probably weren't going to be able to add a full 5-day extra classroom into the program, but adding a 4th day onto the in-class version is very doable for them. So that is why they were interested in piloting the program, and ultimately have now decided that this is the model that they're going forward with. So when we did the pilot, we learned a lot of things. A lot of the things that I've talked about are as a direct result. So the initial program looked a little different, but what I've presented today is a representation of some of the changes that we made after the pilot, but want to cover before we open it up to questions to say, what did we learn from the pilot? And I would say the number one thing we learned is the blended training model really was an incredibly effective and efficient way to train Kaizen leaders. Everyone coming out of the pilot, and we did surveys, we did debriefing class, as well as surveys after the fact, felt that the online portion really prepared them to come into class, and the 2 days really gave them confidence and the ability to feel like they could go out and, with some coaching, run Kaizen events of their own. We learned our classroom sessions have to be interactive and have to provide participants with multiple opportunities. So we probably didn't have enough of that in the first round that we did, and so those are some of the key changes that were made after the pilot. And then again, I think the demand for training has to be balanced with the ability to provide coaching support and opportunities to observe or co-lead prior to independently leading Kaizen events. So just training folks with no support doesn't set them up or the program up to really be able to successfully deliver results. And so that is what I wanted to talk to you today, a little bit about the experiences and what we've built. So now I would love to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Whitney. We had a number of questions come in when you had your slide on that had that event flow for a Kaizen event.
Okay.
And the first question that was posed was about the participant training. So you talked about normally you would allocate a couple hours to train participants. It may be new training, it may be refresher training for some of the participants. But do you have a standard curriculum that you've used, that you recommend, or do you customize this training based on the topic of the Kaizen?
Sure. So that's a great question, and the answer is I do both. Typically you do both. So there are some standard things that are going to be a part of any Kaizen that I generally suggest people train. So the Kaizen methodology, what it is, what's going to happen over the next days that you have them together. So that's something that I would always do, unless again you have a group that have done tons of Kaizens. And there are just some key things. Talking about waste. So whatever, a lot of organizations that I work with use the downtime methodology on talking about waste. Whatever acronym, TIM would, there are a lot of different acronyms for that. So I typically always encourage people go through the waste and the different types of waste. Talk about value add versus non-value add. Talk about either process mapping or value stream mapping and what you do with that, because those are key things that you're always going to do in any Kaizen event. And then the rest of the modules, I typically say tailor to what you really think they're going to need to know. So if you have a Kaizen that everybody doing something differently, or there's no real documented way in which to do the process, is going to be part of the problem. Having a lesson on standard work, maybe even carving out time to do standard pig or another exercise that you might have in demonstrate standard would be good. If it's something around batching, kind of pulling those lessons out. And there are a couple of ways you can do the training, and I've seen them done either way, and either way can work. What I generally like to do when I'm running Kaizen events are do sort of the standard stuff up front. So in that couple of hours, do what's a Kaizen, waste training, because you're going to go right into process mapping. And then if you have other topics, maybe start to tee them up later in the event as you're getting close. If you're getting close to root cause or getting close to solutions, and you want to talk about standard work. So maybe that happens on day 2 so that they don't get training overload at the upfront, but really either way is fine.
Okay, that's very helpful. Now, let's continue to talk about that Kaizen event flow. And your topics that you listed in each category were fairly general. We got a question in regards to whether or not any change management activity is included.
So another great question. You guys have great questions today. Yes, so change management I think starts at the beginning. So one of those things that we didn't talk about probably as pre-work is doing some sort of communication planning and stakeholder analysis. So understanding, I think, who the players are and how they feel about the process, what their role is. I think engaging the sponsor to talk about making that case for change. So, setting the stage for, why this is important and why that you're doing this event. Having the sponsor come into the team and be visible and vocal with the team about, what the expectations are. And then I think, yes, as you start to uncover what the problems are and the root causes, part of that implementation plan is also, you've got this group of people who are in the room doing this, but you've got bunches of other people doing the same work that aren't involved. And so how do you bring them in? How do you bring them up to speed so that they understand not just what the changes are, but why those changes are happening? And then again, ongoing communication and change management after the fact as you continue to implement the solutions. And different organizations, do different things. I've been in organizations and myself have done where, invite the employees not in the event and at the end of each day for what we would call a wall walk and talk to them about, well, here's what we did in today's event, here's what we came up with, allow them to give input into what's happening. Maybe there's something we missed or something they don't see. So having that happen every day, doing the report out in front of the entire, whether it be the facility or the entire department, so that everyone gets to know at the end of the week what came out of that, what happened, and what's going to be happening. So yes, I think definitely understanding the landscape and involving as many people as you can in order to mitigate that change and engaging the sponsor and having the sponsor and the process owners help is a really vital piece of both the pre-work and what happens during the event.
Okay, thank you. Here's the question, and you and I have talked about the whole question about value stream mapping, process flow. Is it a hybrid, and which is most effective with different kinds of groups? We got a question in regards to the timing of whatever tool you're using, process flow, value stream mapping. Which is more effective, have you found? Doing that map prior to the Kaizen as part of your prep work, or doing it that first day in what you've mapped out to be the defined day?
Sure. I think there are multiple options. Either way can work. So I think I'll start first with value stream mapping versus process mapping. That question probably depends upon the environment. In manufacturing environments, in heavy operational environments, value stream mapping may be the way to go. My bias is a value stream map is at a much higher level, and not in higher level of detail, but higher level looking across the entire value stream than what a small Kaizen event is. So I generally say, value stream's great at identifying what Kaizen opportunities might be, and then leveraging more process mapping in the actual Kaizen event to get to the deep step-by-step what happens in the process. And I would say that is especially true within transactional processes. You really need that level of detail that you get out of a process map, but certainly doesn't mean that you can't add all of the data points and have a process map with good rich data on it. In regards to when it should be done, it's best because it really needs to be fresh to have it happen in that first day of the event because it's there, people are there, you can talk about it, you can, if there are questions, go out to see the process happening, come back in and let that inform your process mapping. If you do have to do it before because maybe you can only get 4 days and that's what they decide to do is do the process mapping before so that doesn't happen in the event. It has to happen really, really close because if there's more than, I would say, a few days in between when you do your process map and when you do your event, you're going to have to spend a whole bunch of time just level setting the team. And if different people did it, you're going to have to spend a whole lot of time level setting the team on what's on the process map that you're going to spend the same amount of time as you would just doing the process map. So if you do that, I would say do it with the team you're going to have and do it within, if your Kaizen kicks off on Monday, I wouldn't do it any sooner than probably Tuesday, Wednesday of the week prior.
And that leads into this whole question about scope and how you scope a Kaizen event effectively. Can you tell us your thoughts in regards to how you determine a feasible scope for a single Kaizen event without jumping ahead to what possible solutions may look like?
Sure, great questions today. A Kaizen event, some of the things that when I coach Kaizen leaders on, is it too big, is it not too big? I think one of the key hallmarks are how many people are involved in making the decision, because a Kaizen event, again, if you're trying to get everything done in that 5-day period, you really have to have no more than one is optimal, maybe 2 decision makers, so that they're not generally, I don't want to say they're not cross-functional, but hitting 1 to 2 departments, because if you have a whole group of stakeholders that all have to agree on the solutions that are being put in place, that is really, really hard to get done in the course of that week. So that's the number one question I typically ask people are, how many people, who's going to be the decision maker, is there a decision maker, and no more than 1 or 2. So I think that's the first piece. I think the second piece is understanding, can you really tease out and accurately tease out what the problems are, during the act of process mapping, value stream mapping, and going to the Gemba and watching the process happen. So, if you're finding yourself running 20 reports and doing a ton of data analysis, maybe not something that is built for a Kaizen event. So it's really those simple visual solutions where it's easy to identify the waste and easy to identify what's causing that and making those changes. The other thing I would say for a Kaizen event that's kind of a no-no for a Kaizen event, or kind of as a red flag for me on a Kaizen event, is how much technology is involved. So if it's going to require a large change technology systems, whether that be reports or other things, really hard to do that within the scope of a Kaizen event, because of the fact that those things have to be, business cases need to be written depending on the organization, and funding needs to happen, and those things take a long time in most organizations. So, if it's just quick changes to workflow or setting up SharePoint sites, those kinds of things, then that absolutely works. But big changes to technology are also something that I think helps to say, what is a longer-term project versus what may be appropriate for a Kaizen event.
Okay, very good. We have one final wrap-up question, and we're not going to be able to get to all of the questions that were submitted. So let me first preface that final question with saying, if we haven't gotten to your question, please feel free to our email addresses will be included on the final slide. So for this final wrap-up question, can you share a Kaizen event that was very difficult and challenging, and what you learned from that experience?
My goodness, yes, I will. So I had a Kaizen event it was in a transactional setting, and it was the focus of the event was a prioritization process, portfolio management process for one area of the business, and it was primarily looking at technology type projects. And so the current state, or the state as I understood it, was there was a lot of things that were going around the process. It wasn't really clear sort of what needed to go when in the process, and what kind of what the process was, what the approval process was, who should be involved. I mean, there was just a lot of stuff, lots of work happening for things that then weren't even approved by anybody. So IT would spend hours putting together estimates, and like no one had even said this was a project we should be considering. And so started out, went through the first day, met with the sponsor, met with or who thought was a sponsor, and unfortunately the champion of the project, her boss, had a family emergency, a death in her family, and so we didn't get a chance to talk before, and she didn't make it to the kickoff of the event. And so our first couple days went really, really well. We mapped the current state, we kind of affinitized it, really realized in the process that there wasn't that there was so much waste in the process, it was when things were happening in the process that caused all of the waste. And so, kind of defined our current state, and came up with some solutions around that, and then brought the sponsor in for the pitch out, and she was totally what our project sponsor had said sort of were the goals of the project. They weren't aligned, so the champion wasn't aligned with that, and so she kind of spun the team around like, well, I thought I'd see this, or I thought this was that, and so we really caused the team then to really doubt, like, well, is this the right problem? Is this really a problem? And so we spent a couple of days really trying to get the team back on board, to say, really they weren't that far apart when we teased it out, and once the champion really understood what the solutions were and what the problems in the process were, but recovering the team from that. And I will tell you, we got some stuff done during the week, but we were like an hour from the final pitch out, and people were still like, well, I don't know. And so, we talked about change management early, so kind of not being on top of making sure that everyone was aligned as to the problem and what kind of they were anticipating as the outcome, not the solution, but the type of outcome they were looking for, and then all of the change management that had to come after that was very painful, but a good lesson learned. I never do that anymore. If I have to camp out at people's homes, I will talk to the champion before I start the event.
Oh, yeah. I worked for 20 years for an energy company, and we did Kaizen events. And I'll say that I agree with your statement in regards to them being really tough events for the facilitator. I never a number and then acted as a sponsor for a number of them. But I'll say they are one of the most rewarding experiences for participants. And in an organization that may just be chugging along and they really need to make a visible statement in terms of their commitment to change management, that Kaizens are a wonderful tool to do that, to just visibly demonstrate management's willingness to implement, to act, and for people to participate in that. Also, what I learned was the value of the pre-meetings, that I never attended so many pre-meetings before and never have again since my involvement with Kaizen events in getting the stakeholders all lined up and the sponsors. And as you said, that if you have to camp outside of somebody's door, you learn the value of that in getting the organization aligned.
So, and I totally agree, Ellen, and I'll kind of make this, because I know we're at time here, my last comment. I think what you just said is really for those of you on the phone who may just be starting your Kaizen and are getting pushback around, well, I can't give resources up for 5 days, which is often why they end up being 2 or 3 days, and then just kind of become solutioning workshops. What I have found in my experience, and I've done this myself on a lot of companies, I've helped other companies, are, once you can get them to commit to the 5 days, if you are really diligent and strong about picking the right events and making sure they're set up for success, I call it people then go Kaizen crazy, because people are amazed at what you can get done in those 4 to 5 days, and then they just want more of it, to the point of sometimes you got to be like, okay, not everything's a Kaizen event. So, I think, Ellen, what you said is really, really, I think that's a very, very true statement, and I've seen that happen time and time again in all different types of organizations.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experience, Whitney, and thank you to all of you in the audience for joining us. We hope to continue the dialogue. First thing would be to visit our website. We have a wealth of resources available. First off, we have the e-learning for the Kaizen Leader Training, as well as the inbox simulation that you can learn a lot more about by visiting our website. For those of you that are certified black belts, we also have our Master Black Belt program that we run with Ohio State, and that's a blended program, so that combines both e-learning as well as 2 weeks of classroom sessions. For those of you who may not already be certified black belts, you might be interested in exploring some of our other online Lean Six Sigma course offerings. We offer both green belt and black belt training and certification, which can be completed 100% online. You see free resources noted on the slide, and we have a wealth. Please dig into our website. We have tutorials on tools, we have white papers, articles, as well as a whole library of webcasts such as this on a variety of Lean Six Sigma topics. So again, thank you for spending the past hour with us. Please feel free to contact either Whitney or myself if you have additional questions or comments on today's program. One thing I will mention, that while the e-learning course as well as the inbox simulation, we also offer a package that includes both the e-learning, the inbox simulation, along with the facilitator slides that Whitney has developed for leading the event training. Okay, so if you want to learn more about that, please shoot me an email, and I'll be glad to talk to you more about that to give you more detail. Hope that you'll join us for an upcoming program. Our next one is scheduled for December 17th. Todd Thompson, the Director of Operational Excellence for Cardinal Health, is going to be presenting a historical perspective of Lean and how Cardinal Health is applying those concepts. Again, thank you for sharing part of your day with us, and we hope to see you again next month. Thank you.